Have you ever felt your entire nervous system vibrating, reaching for something that seems to dissolve the moment you grasp for it? There you are, sitting in another meeting, nodding along to conversations that feel hollow while your chest constricts, with the familiar ache of pretending everything is under control. Your hands might be steady on the conference table, but inside, something primal is screaming that this relentless pushing, this constant proving, this exhausting dance of never quite arriving where you thought you would be by now is slowly hollowing you out from the inside. What if I told you that this very sensation, this crushing weight of trying to orchestrate every outcome, is actually your psyche attempting to protect you from something Carl Jung discovered about the fundamental nature of human consciousness? Jung identified specific psychological patterns where our conscious mind, in its desperate attempt to maintain control, creates what he called a split between our authentic self and our performing self. This internal fracture generates a chronic state of psychological tension that manifests as exactly what you are feeling right now, that bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of coffee or motivation can touch. Here is what most people never realize. The very mechanism you have been using to feel safe, to feel worthy, to feel like you matter, is the same mechanism that is systematically dismantling your capacity for genuine peace. By the end of this exploration, you will understand not only why this pattern has been running your life, but how to step out of it without losing everything you have worked to build. And if you want to dive deeper into these profound psychological insights that can transform how you experience reality itself, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to give strength to this channel. Because what we are about to uncover challenges everything our culture teaches about success and fulfillment. But first, let me paint you a picture of what this psychological imprisonment actually looks like in the landscape of your daily existence. You wake up each morning with a mental checklist already forming before your feet touch the floor. A stream of calculations about what needs to be accomplished, managed, optimized, and controlled to maintain the illusion that you are successfully navigating your life. Your nervous system never quite settles, because somewhere in the background, there is always this subtle hum of vigilance, this scanning for the next problem to solve, the next performance to deliver, the next proof that you are worthy of the space you occupy in this world. Jung observed that this state of chronic psychological activation creates what he termed a compensation mechanism in the unconscious mind. While your conscious awareness becomes increasingly focused on external management and control, your unconscious begins to generate symptoms designed to restore psychological equilibrium. You might notice that your body holds tension in places that make no logical sense. Your jaw clenches during phone calls that should be routine. Your shoulders carry weight that has nothing to do with physical load. Your breathing becomes shallow even when you are sitting still, as if some part of you is perpetually bracing for impact. These physical manifestations are not random occurrences. They are your psyche attempting to communicate that the current operating system is creating internal discord. Jung discovered that when we live primarily from what he called the adapted self, the version of ourselves that has learned to meet external expectations, we inevitably create a psychological split that manifests as chronic inner tension. This adapted self becomes hypervigilant about maintaining its carefully constructed image, constantly monitoring for signs of failure, inadequacy, or rejection. Meanwhile, the authentic self, what Jung referred to as the natural personality, becomes increasingly suppressed, generating what he observed as a sense of existential restlessness. You find yourself achieving external milestones that feel strangely hollow. You engage in conversations that leave you feeling more isolated than before you spoke. You complete tasks that should bring satisfaction, but instead generate an immediate hunger for the next accomplishment, as if nothing you create can fill the persistent sense of something being fundamentally missing. Jung recognized this pattern as a symptom of what he called psychological inflation, where the conscious ego becomes over-identified with its role as the controller and manager of life experience. This inflation creates a chronic state of internal pressure, because the ego is attempting to perform a function that actually belongs to deeper layers of psychological organization. The exhaustion you feel is not the result of working too hard. It is the energetic cost of operating from a part of yourself that was never designed to carry the full weight of navigating human existence. What happens next is crucial to understand, because it determines whether this pattern continues to drain your life force or becomes the catalyst for profound psychological transformation. Jung spent decades observing how individuals unknowingly construct what he termed psychological complexes, automatic patterns of thinking and feeling that operate below conscious awareness. These complexes develop when our natural impulses toward authenticity collide with external demands for conformity. The result is a psychological split, where part of us learns to perform according to external expectations, while another part, what Jung called the shadow, holds all the rejected aspects of our authentic nature. When we live primarily from this performing self, we enter what Jung described as a state of psychological inflation, where our conscious ego believes it must control and manage every aspect of life to maintain its precarious sense of identity. This creates a chronic state of hypervigilance, where we scan constantly for threats to our carefully constructed image, where we second-guess our natural responses, where we exhaust ourselves trying to anticipate and manage every possible outcome. Jung discovered that this pattern of psychological inflation inevitably leads to what he called enantiodromia, a Greek term meaning the emergence of the opposite. In practical terms, this means that the more tightly we grip control, the more chaotic and unpredictable our inner experience becomes. The more we try to force outcomes, the more resistant life seems to become. The more we perform for validation, the more empty and disconnected we feel inside. This is not a personal failing. This is a fundamental principle of psychological dynamics that Jung observed consistently across cultures and throughout history. What happens next is that our psyche begins to generate symptoms. Jung called these compensatory mechanisms designed to restore psychological balance. You might notice that your body refuses to sleep despite your exhaustion. Your mind might race with anxious thoughts even when everything appears to be going well. You might find yourself becoming irritable with people you care about for no apparent reason. These are not signs of weakness. These are your unconscious mind attempting to communicate that the current approach to life is unsustainable. Jung realized that most psychological suffering stems not from external circumstances, but from our resistance to the natural flow of psychological energy. When we try to force our internal experience to match our external expectations, we create what he called a neurotic split. This split manifests as a constant feeling of being slightly out of sync with yourself, of never quite feeling at home in your own skin, of always being one step behind where you think you should be. The exhaustion you feel is not just physical fatigue. It is the energetic cost of maintaining this artificial division within yourself. Jung observed that healing begins when we stop trying to eliminate the uncomfortable aspects of our experience, and instead learn to relate to them differently. This does not mean becoming passive or giving up on goals. It means developing what Jung called a more conscious relationship with the unconscious forces that are actually driving our behavior. Most people operate from what Jung termed the persona, the mask we wear to meet social expectations. The persona is not inherently problematic. We all need some degree of social adaptation to function in the world. Problems arise when we become so identified with our persona that we lose contact with our deeper, authentic nature. When this happens, we begin to experience what Jung called a crisis of meaning, where external achievements feel hollow and internal satisfaction becomes increasingly elusive. The way out of this pattern involves what Jung called individuation, a process of integrating the rejected aspects of ourselves back into conscious awareness. This begins with recognizing that the discomfort you have been trying to escape is actually valuable information about where your energy wants to flow naturally. Instead of forcing yourself to fit predetermined molds, individuation involves listening more carefully to your authentic impulses and learning to trust your natural rhythm of expansion and contraction. Jung discovered that when we stop fighting against our natural psychological rhythms, something remarkable happens. The energy we were using to maintain artificial control becomes available for creative expression. The tension we were holding in our body begins to release. The relationships we were straining to maintain through performance begin to deepen through authenticity. This shift does not happen overnight, but it begins the moment you stop treating your discomfort as an enemy to be conquered and start treating it as information to be honored. Jung emphasized that this process requires what he called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of rushing to resolve every uncomfortable feeling, we learn to sit with the complexity of being human. Instead of forcing immediate solutions, we develop patience with the organic timing of psychological transformation. Instead of judging ourselves for having contradictory impulses, we begin to appreciate the richness that comes from embracing our full psychological complexity. What Jung understood, and what our culture often misses, is that authentic power comes not from controlling outcomes, but from aligning with the deeper currents of psychological energy that are already flowing within us. When we stop swimming against these currents, when we stop exhausting ourselves trying to impose our will on every situation, we discover that life has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own way of unfolding that often surpasses what our conscious mind could have orchestrated. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming responsive rather than reactive. It means learning to discern when action flows from authentic inspiration versus when it flows from fear or compulsion. It means developing the capacity to move through the world with presence rather than pressure. Jung observed that individuals who learn to trust this deeper flow of psychological energy report a profound shift in their relationship to time, to relationships, to work, to life itself. Instead of constantly feeling behind or ahead of where they should be, they begin to experience a sense of rightness about their pace. Instead of forcing conversations or connections, they find that authentic relationships begin to emerge naturally. Instead of pushing themselves through tasks with grim determination, they discover that work can become an expression of their natural enthusiasm. This transformation is not about adopting a new set of beliefs or techniques. It is about remembering and reclaiming a way of being that has been obscured by years of psychological conditioning. Jung called this remembering a return to the self, the deeper organizing principle within each individual that knows how to navigate life with wisdom and grace. The self operates according to different principles than the ego. Where the ego seeks to control, the self seeks to respond. Where the ego demands immediate results, the self trusts organic timing. Where the ego judges experiences as good or bad, the self recognizes that all experiences contain valuable information about the direction of growth. Learning to operate from the self rather than the ego does not eliminate challenges or guarantee that everything will unfold according to our preferences. What it does is eliminate the additional layer of suffering that comes from fighting against what is already happening. Jung discovered that when we align with the self, we stop exhausting ourselves with resistance and begin to direct our energy toward conscious participation in the natural process of psychological evolution. This shift changes everything, not because external circumstances necessarily improve, though they often do, but because our relationship to whatever arises becomes more spacious, more creative, more alive. The symptoms that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. The goals that once felt desperate begin to feel inspiring. The relationships that once felt draining begin to feel nourishing. Jung spent his life documenting this process of psychological transformation, not as a theoretical concept, but as a lived reality that anyone can access by learning to trust the wisdom that already exists within their own psyche. The exhaustion you have been carrying is not a sign that you need to try harder. It is a sign that you are ready to try differently. It is your unconscious mind inviting you to discover what becomes possible when you stop forcing your way through life and start flowing with the deeper currents of your authentic nature. This is not about perfection. It is about integration. It is not about elimination of difficulty. It is about transformation of your relationship to difficulty. It is not about control. It is about conscious collaboration with the forces that are already working within you toward your highest expression. Jung believed that this psychological transformation is not just personally beneficial, but collectively essential. As more individuals learn to operate from authentic presence rather than compensatory performance, the entire fabric of human culture begins to shift toward greater wisdom, greater compassion, greater sustainability. Your willingness to question the patterns that have been running your life is not just personal healing. It is participation in the larger evolution of human consciousness. The moment you stop exhausting yourself with force and begin trusting the intelligence of your natural flow, you become part of the solution to the collective neurosis of our time. This is Jung's gift to anyone willing to receive it, the recognition that within each individual lies the capacity for profound psychological transformation, and that this transformation naturally benefits not only the individual, but the entire web of relationships in which they participate. Your fatigue is not failure. It is invitation. Your discomfort is not dysfunction. It is information. Your longing for something more authentic is not impossible idealism. It is your psyche pointing you toward the life that is actually meant for you.